Brother betrayed me by getting my wife pregnant and letting me raise his son. Now our parents have disowned him, left me their $1.5 million inheritance, and he's begging me for help. Growing up, my brother Jason was always the favorite. My parents never admitted it outright, but anyone with eyes could see it. If Jason got into trouble at school, it was, "Boys will be boys." If I so much as forgot to take out the trash, I was lazy and disrespectful. If Jason wanted something expensive, my parents bent over backward to get it. Meanwhile, I had to work part-time jobs as a teenager just to afford my own clothes. I learned to deal with it, but Jason made sure my life was miserable. He was the classic golden child, charming, confident, and manipulative. And he knew how to make me look bad. If something went missing in the house, guess who got blamed? If something broke? My fault. If Jason was in a bad mood, he'd take it out on me, and my parents always told me to stop antagonizing him. But I still tried to be the better person. When we became adults, I kept my distance. I built a good life. Got a steady job, bought a house, and most importantly, I married Emily. She was everything I could have asked for, kind, supportive, and loving. We had a son, Liam, and for the first time, I felt like I had a real family. Jason, on the other hand, never got his life together. He bounced from job to job, borrowed money he never paid back, and had a long trail of exes who all had the same story. He was a liar and a user. But no matter how many times he screwed up, my parents always defended him. Then things got worse. Out of nowhere, Jason started showing up at my house constantly. At first, he claimed he was just visiting, but something felt off. Emily was polite to him, but I noticed she started getting uncomfortable when he was around. I chalked it up to her not liking his personality. Who could blame her? But then, I started noticing strange things. Emily was acting distant. Jason suddenly had more money, despite still not having a real job. And worst of all, my son, Liam, started looking different. Not like me. I had no idea that my life was about to be completely shattered. I wanted to believe I was imagining things. That maybe I was just being paranoid. But once that seed of doubt was planted, I couldn't ignore it. Emily was distant, always tired, always avoiding eye contact. When I asked her what was wrong, she brushed it off. "Just stressed," she'd say. "Work has been exhausting." But then there was Jason. He was around way too much. Every time I turned around, there he was, hanging out in my living room, laughing with Emily, playing with Liam like he was more than just an uncle. It didn't sit right with me. Then, little things started adding up. One day, I walked into the kitchen and saw Jason standing way too close to Emily. When they noticed me, she jumped back like she'd been caught doing something wrong. Jason, on the other hand, just smirked. "Relax, bro," he said, slapping me on the shoulder like I was being ridiculous. Then, I started noticing Liam's features. At first, I didn't want to admit it. But the older he got, the clearer it became. His hair, his smile. There were so many little things that didn't match me. One night, when Emily was asleep, I dug through the junk drawer and pulled out an old DNA test kit I had bought on a whim months ago. I swabbed Liam's cheek while he was sleeping and sent it in. I told myself I was being ridiculous. That I'd get the results back, and it would prove I was his father. That I could finally put these nagging doubts to rest. But I was wrong. When the results came in a few weeks later, my stomach dropped. 0% probability of paternity. Liam wasn't mine. I sat there, staring at the paper, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My hands were shaking. My pulse was pounding in my ears. And then it hit me. There was only one person who had been around my wife long enough to betray me like this. Jason. I don't remember much of what happened immediately after. I just remember gripping that piece of paper so tightly it crumbled in my fist. I had to confront Emily. I had to know the truth. So, that night, I waited for her to come home. And when she walked through the door, I held up the test results and simply said, "Explain." Her face went pale. And in that moment I knew. I knew everything. Emily just stood there, frozen. Her face lost all color, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw pure panic in her eyes. I didn't say another word. I just held up the DNA test results and waited. Her hands started shaking. I can explain," she stammered. "Then explain," I said, my voice eerily calm. She opened her mouth but hesitated. That silence? That hesitation? It told me everything I needed to know. But I wanted to hear her say it. I wanted her to admit what she had done. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her lip trembled. "It was a mistake," she whispered. "It only happened once." I laughed. A bitter, humorless laugh. "Once?" I repeated. "Are you seriously expecting me to believe that?" Her silence confirmed my suspicion. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the rage bubbling inside me. "So, Jason," I said, practically spitting out his name. "He's Liam's father, isn't he?" Emily broke down sobbing. She didn't even try to deny it. That was it. That was my answer. I felt like I was going to be sick. My own brother. My wife. My son, who wasn't even mine. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't even think straight. I grabbed my jacket and stormed out of the house. I don't know how long I drove that night, but by the time I pulled over, my hands were clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that my knuckles were white. Jason. The golden child. The one my parents always defended. The one who had taken everything from me my whole life. And now? He had taken this too? I wasn't just going to let this go. I had lost everything. But Jason? He was about to lose everything too. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. Instead, I parked in an empty lot and sat in silence, staring out the windshield. My entire life had just blown up in front of me, and I had no idea what to do next. But one thing was certain, Jason wasn't getting away with this. By morning, my anger had hardened into something sharper. I wasn't going to scream or punch walls. No. I was going to be smart about this. Calculated. I drove home, walked through the door, and found Emily sitting at the kitchen table, eyes red and puffy. She looked like she hadn't slept. "I'm getting a divorce," I said flatly. No screaming, no fighting. Just the truth. Emily flinched like I had slapped her. "Please don't do this," she begged. "I made a mistake, but we can fix this. We can go to therapy, we can." I shook my head. "You slept with my brother, Emily. And you lied to me for years. There's no fixing this." She broke down sobbing, but I was done feeling sorry for her. Then came the second part of my plan. I grabbed my phone, pulled up Jason's number, and called him. He answered on the third ring. "Yo, what's up, man?" His voice was casual, like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't destroyed my life. I clenched my jaw. "We need to talk. Now." Jason sighed. "Look, if this is about Emily." "You knew?" I cut him off, my voice deadly calm. "You knew I found out, and you didn't even try to say anything?" A pause. Then a nervous chuckle. "I mean, dude, it's complicated." Complicated. That was his excuse? I forced myself to stay calm. "Meet me at the diner on 8th Street. 1 hour. Jason hesitated. "I don't know, man. 1 hour. Then I hung up. I wasn't going to fight him in the middle of a diner. No, I wanted to look him in the eye and make him realize just how badly he had screwed up. And once my parents found out what he had done, his golden child status was about to crumble. I got to the diner early and picked a booth in the back. My hands were steady, my heart was cold. I had played the nice guy my whole life, the one who let things go. Not this time. Jason strolled in 10 minutes late, wearing that same smug expression he always had. The same one that got him out of trouble every time. "Man, I was hoping you'd calm down before we did this," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Look, I get it, you're mad." I slammed the DNA results on the table. His eyes flickered down for just a second before he leaned back with a sigh. "Okay. So you know. That's all you have to say?" I asked, my voice level. Jason ran a hand through his hair, looking almost bored. "It's not like I planned it, dude. It just happened." I let out a breath through my nose, gripping the edge of the table to keep from losing my temper. "It just happened?" I echoed. "You slept with my wife, got her pregnant, and then stood by while I raised your kid for years. And all you've got is it just happened?" Jason shrugged. "I mean, you and Emily were having problems. She needed someone to talk to, I was there." I cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Unbelievable. You're actually trying to justify this." He had the nerve to look annoyed. "Look, man, it's not like I wanted this to blow up your life." I stared at him for a long moment. Then I leaned forward. "You always take, Jason. You take, and then when it all falls apart, you act like it's no big deal. But this? You ruined my life. And you have no idea what's coming next." Jason snorted. "What, you gonna hit me?" I smiled. "No. I'm going to make sure Mom and Dad know exactly what you did. That wiped the smirk off his face. Think about it, I continued. All your screw-ups, all the times they bailed you out. But this? You went too far. The golden child routine won't save you this time. Jason's face paled. Come on, man. You know how they are. If you tell them. Oh, I will. I stood up and dropped a few bills on the table. Enjoy the last few days of being their favorite, Jason. Because once they hear the truth, I smiled coldly, you're on your own. Then I walked out, leaving him sitting there, speechless for once in his life. Next stop, my parents. Jason had spent a lifetime getting away with everything. That was about to change. I drove straight to my parents' house, my grip tight on the steering wheel. Jason had spent his whole life screwing up, and they had always defended him. But this was too big to ignore. When I pulled into the driveway, I took a deep breath and stepped out. My mom opened the door before I even knocked, smiling like she always did when she saw me. Oh, honey, what a surprise! Come in, come in! I stepped inside, my dad looking up from his chair. Didn't expect you today, he said, lowering the volume on the TV. I didn't waste time. I pulled the DNA results from my pocket and handed them to him. Read it, I said. He frowned but took the paper. My mom leaned over his shoulder, reading along. Silence. Then my mom gasped, covering her mouth. My dad's face darkened. What is this? He asked, his voice sharp. I crossed my arms. That's proof that Jason slept with Emily. Liam isn't my son. He's Jason's. My mom's eyes filled with tears. No. No, that can't be right. It is, I said firmly. Emily admitted it. Jason didn't even deny it. He's been lying to me for years, letting me raise his kid while laughing behind my back. My dad's hands clenched the paper so tightly I thought it might tear. That ungrateful little. He stopped himself, taking a deep breath. My mom shook her head, still in denial. But he's your brother. No, Mom. I cut her off. He's your son. And you spent my entire life defending him while he treated me like garbage. Well, this is what happens when you let someone get away with everything. He doesn't stop. He just takes and takes until there's nothing left. My dad stood up abruptly, pacing the room. Where is he? His voice was low, furious. At the diner, I said. Probably still sitting there, trying to figure out how to weasel his way out of this. Mom sank into a chair, shaking her head. I can't believe this. Dad ran a hand down his face, exhaling sharply. Then he looked at me. Son, I want you to know something. His voice was steady. We're done with him. I blinked. What? We're done, he repeated. I've spent years making excuses for him, but this is too far. He's not welcome in this house anymore. Mom's head snapped up. But, no, Helen, my dad said firmly. Enough. He's a grown man, and he made his choices. And now he can live with them. I swallowed. I had expected anger. I had expected denial. But I hadn't expected this. Jason, the golden child, was finally being cut off. Dad sighed and looked at me. I know we haven't always been fair to you. And I can't change the past. But I can make things right now. I didn't know what to say. Then, as if reading my mind, Dad said, We need to update some paperwork. I frowned. Paperwork? He nodded. The inheritance. The house, the money. We were going to split it between you and Jason. His jaw tightened. But after what he's done, he's out. You'll get everything. I stared at him, stunned. Jason had always been the favorite. Always the one they protected. But now, he was nothing to them. And when he found out, he was going to lose it. 2 days passed before Jason found out. I didn't tell him. I didn't have to. He showed up at my house unannounced, again, banging on my front door like a lunatic. When I opened it, he stormed inside, shoving a crumpled piece of paper in my face. You told them? He shouted. His usual cocky smirk was gone. Now, he looked desperate. I glanced at the paper. It was a legal document, an updated will. Our parents had officially cut Jason out of their inheritance. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Of course I told them. What, did you think I'd just keep your little secret forever? Jason ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. Dude, you don't understand. I need that money. I've got debts, serious ones. If I don't pay. I raised an eyebrow. Not my problem. His head snapped up, eyes wild. Not your, are you even hearing yourself? We're brothers. I let out a sharp laugh. Oh, now I'm your brother? You weren't thinking about that when you were sneaking around with my wife, were you? Jason's face twisted in frustration. It wasn't like that, man. It was a mistake, I told you. And Liam, he's your son too, whether you like it or not. My fists clenched at that, but I forced myself to stay calm. Liam is your responsibility now. I'll always care about him, but I'm not going to be your safety net. Jason's expression flickered, panic creeping in. Come on, man, he said, his voice quieter now. Just talk to Dad. Make him change his mind. You know I can't survive without their help. I stared at him for a long moment. And then I smiled. Sounds like a you problem. Jason's mouth fell open. For the first time in our lives, he was the one begging me. And I wasn't going to save him. No, I said, stepping back and holding the door open. Get out of my house. Jason's eyes darted around, as if looking for another way to weasel back in. But there wasn't one. He had burned every bridge. Slowly, he turned and walked out. I shut the door behind him, locked it, and let out a deep breath. For the first time in my life, Jason wasn't my problem anymore. But something told me he wasn't done causing trouble. Not yet. I thought cutting Jason off would be the end of it. That he'd finally accept the consequences and disappear from my life. I was wrong. 2 days later, I got a call from my mom. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. The moment I picked up, I heard her panicked voice. He's here, she whispered. My stomach dropped. What? Jason, she said, her voice shaking. He's at the house. He's begging. I exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of my nose. Put Dad on the phone. There was some shuffling, and then my dad's firm voice came through. I told him to leave, he said, irritation laced in his tone. But he won't go. He's sitting on the porch, refusing to move. I clenched my jaw. I'll be there soon. When I pulled up to my parents' house, I saw him immediately, slumped on the front steps, head in his hands. He looked rough. His usual arrogance was gone. Instead, he looked like a man whose world was crumbling around him. When he saw me, he shot up. You have to fix this, he blurted out. They're serious, man. They're really cutting me off. I folded my arms. They should have done it years ago. Jason shook his head, pacing frantically. You don't get it, man. I owe people, bad people. If I don't pay them back, I'm screwed. For a split second, I hesitated. Not because I felt bad for him, he deserved this. But if Jason had managed to get himself tangled up with the wrong crowd, this was worse than I thought. I don't know what you want me to do, I said. Mom and Dad made their choice. You made yours. Jason's hands clenched into fists. You're seriously gonna let me crash and burn? I tilted my head. You let me raise your kid for years while laughing behind my back. You ruined my marriage. And now you want me to save you? I shook my head. You did this to yourself. Jason's breathing was heavy, his eyes darting between me and the door. Then, something in his expression shifted. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. I don't have anywhere else to go, he muttered. I stared at him, unmoved. For years, Jason had taken everything from me. Now, he had nothing. And it was exactly what he deserved. I turned to my dad, who stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Call the cops if he won't leave. Jason's head snapped up. Wait. But I was already walking away. I didn't look back. Jason had finally run out of people to save him. And I was done being his backup plan. I didn't hear from Jason for a few days after that. A part of me thought maybe, just maybe, he had finally gotten the message. Then my phone rang. It was Emily. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. I almost didn't. But curiosity got the best of me. I picked up. What do you want? She hesitated. It's Jason. Of course it was. What about him? I asked, already exhausted. She let out a shaky breath. He showed up at my place last night. That got my attention. What? He was a mess, she said quickly. Rambling about how you ruined his life, how he had nowhere to go. He was drunk, angry, desperate. I rubbed my temple. And you let him in? A pause. Yes. I cursed under my breath. Emily. I know, okay? She snapped. But Liam was asleep, and I didn't want him causing a scene outside my house. I could already picture it. Jason, slurring his words, blaming everyone but himself. What did he want? I asked. She hesitated again. Money. I let out a humorless laugh. Of course he did. He said he was in trouble. She continued, her voice lower now. That some guys were after him. He begged me for anything I could spare. I sighed. And? I gave him a little. She admitted. Not much. Just enough to get him out of my house. I clenched my jaw. Emily, you can't keep helping him. He's going to keep using you, just like he used me. I know, she whispered. But I feel bad for him. I shook my head. That's exactly how he survives. He makes people feel bad for him. That's how he's always gotten away with everything. She was quiet. Then she said something that sent a chill down my spine. He asked about Liam. I sat up straighter. What? She exhaled sharply. He said he wanted to see him. That he's his real dad and he deserves to be in his life. My blood ran cold. Jason was desperate. He had nothing left. And now? Now he wanted my son. I tightened my grip on the phone. Emily, listen to me carefully. She swallowed. Okay. Jason is out of control, I said firmly. Do not let him near Liam. If he tries to come back, you call the police. Understand? She hesitated, then finally whispered, I understand. I hung up, my mind racing. Jason had nothing left. No money, no home, no family. And that made him dangerous. I had to put an end to this. For good. I didn't sleep that night. Jason was spiraling, and now he was talking about Liam. That was my breaking point. I had put up with his nonsense my entire life, but this was where I drew the line. The next morning, I went straight to a lawyer. I explained everything, the affair, the DNA test, Jason's history of manipulation, and now his sudden interest in Liam. The lawyer listened carefully, then leaned back in his chair. You have no legal obligation to Jason, he said. But if he tries to claim parental rights over Liam, things could get complicated. I felt a lump in my throat. What do I do? He folded his hands. Your best move is to encourage Emily to establish full custody over Liam. If Jason tries anything, the court will see him as an unfit father, given his history. It made sense. Jason had no job, no stability, and a long track record of bad decisions. But I still felt uneasy. Can I do anything else? I asked. The lawyer studied me for a moment. Then, he said something that made my stomach turn. You could consider a restraining order. I exhaled slowly. Against my own brother. If you believe he's a danger to you or your family, it's worth considering, he said simply. Especially if he becomes more erratic. I left the office with a pit in my stomach. I had spent my whole life fighting to be free from Jason's shadow, and now it had come to this. But deep down, I knew the lawyer was right. Jason wasn't going to stop until he had nowhere left to turn. And when that happened, I needed to be ready. That night, I called Emily again. She sounded exhausted. Did you find out anything? Yeah, I said. Listen, I need you to go to a lawyer and make sure you have full custody of Liam. She hesitated. You really think it'll come to that? I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. I know it will. Emily was silent for a long time. Then she whispered, Okay. I exhaled in relief. And if Jason comes back, I won't let him in, she finished. I promise. Good. That was one less thing to worry about. Now I just had to wait. Because I knew Jason wasn't done. And when he made his next move, I'd be ready. Days passed without a word from Jason. It should have made me feel relieved. But instead, it felt like the calm before the storm. Then, one evening, Emily called again. I answered immediately. What's wrong? She hesitated. Jason, he filed for paternity rights. I felt my blood turn ice cold. He what? She swallowed hard. I got a notice today. He's trying to establish legal rights over Liam. He wants visitation. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Are you at home? Yes. Lock your doors, I said firmly. I'll be there in 10 minutes. When I arrived, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, the letter in front of her. She looked pale, her hands trembling. I grabbed the paper and skimmed it quickly. Sure enough, Jason had actually filed. I clenched my jaw. Unbelievable. Emily rubbed her arms, looking nervous. What if the court grants it? What if he... They won't. I cut in. No job. No home. No stability. No judge is going to hand him visitation rights. She bit her lip. But he's Liam's biological father. I exhaled, forcing myself to stay calm. We're going to fight this. I already spoke to a lawyer. We'll make sure Jason doesn't get near Liam. Emily nodded, but I could tell she was still shaken. Then, as if the universe was trying to prove a point, a loud bang sounded from the front door. Both of us froze. Then, Jason's voice. Emily! Open the door! Emily's eyes widened in fear. I stood up instantly, my body on high alert. Of course he showed up. I strode to the door and yanked it open. Jason stood there, looking even worse than before. Dark circles under his eyes, hair disheveled, reeking of alcohol. What the hell do you think you're doing? I snapped. He shoved a piece of paper toward me. I have rights, man, he slurred. You can't keep my son from me. I scoffed. You think a judge is going to take you seriously when you show up drunk banging on doors? Jason blinked, swaying slightly. I just want to see my kid, man. He's not your kid, I said coldly. You lost the right to call him that the second you let me raise him without saying a word. His expression twisted. I cut him off. You need to leave. Right now. He didn't move. I stepped forward. If you don't, I'm calling the cops. That got his attention. Jason's eyes darted between me and Emily, and for a split second, I saw something ugly flash across his face, resentment. Then, without another word, he turned and stumbled away into the night. I exhaled sharply and locked the door. Emily let out a shaky breath. This isn't over, is it? I shook my head. Not yet. Jason was unraveling. And I had a feeling things were about to get worse. After Jason's drunken stunt, I knew it was time to take things a step further. The next morning, I met with my lawyer again. I laid everything out, his unstable behavior, his financial problems, his history of manipulation. The lawyer didn't hesitate. You need a restraining order, he said. Now. I nodded. Do it. That evening, I went back to Emily's house to talk things over. Liam was asleep, and she looked exhausted, still shaken from the night before. Did you file it? She asked. I nodded. By the end of the week, Jason won't be able to come near either of us. She let out a breath of relief. Good. He's getting more unpredictable. I leaned against the counter. Did he try contacting you today? Her expression darkened. He called 6 times. I didn't answer, but he left a voicemail. She handed me her phone. I pressed play. At first, Jason's voice was eerily calm. Emily. I don't know why you're doing this. I love Liam. I deserve to be in his life. Then his tone shifted, bitter, resentful. But he's poisoning you against me, isn't he? My dear brother. He's always wanted me gone. A dry, humorless chuckle. Well, guess what? You can't erase me. I exist. And if you think I'm just gonna disappear, you're dead wrong. The message ended. Emily shivered. He's losing it. I clenched my jaw. Jason wasn't just desperate anymore, he was angry. And that made him dangerous. I placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. Once the restraining order goes through, he won't be able to do anything. She nodded, but I could tell she was still scared. And honestly, so was I. Because Jason wasn't just unraveling. He was getting reckless. And I had no idea what he'd do next. 2 days later, the restraining order was approved. That same night, Jason snapped. Emily called me, her voice shaking. He broke into my house. My blood ran cold. Where is he now? He ran when I called the cops, she whispered. But he trashed the place. I was already grabbing my keys. I'm coming over. When I arrived, I saw the damage, broken picture frames, furniture overturned. Emily hugged Liam tightly, eyes wide with fear. Jason had officially crossed the line. And this time? He wasn't getting away with it. The cops found Jason the next morning. He was passed out in his car behind a gas station, reeking of alcohol. When they ran his name, the The restraining order and the break-in report were enough to get him arrested on the spot. I got the call from the police station. "Do you want to press charges?" the officer asked. I didn't hesitate. Yes. Jason had spent his whole life escaping consequences. Not this time. This time, he was finally going to pay for what he'd done. Jason was charged with trespassing, destruction of property, and violating the restraining order. He tried calling me from jail, but I didn't answer. Mom begged me to reconsider pressing charges. Dad stayed silent, arms crossed, finally seeing Jason for what he really was. But I was done. Jason had taken everything from me, my wife, my trust, my peace. Now, he had nothing. Emily and I focused on moving forward. Liam would grow up safe, far away from Jason's chaos. As for the $1.5 million inheritance, it was mine. And for the first time in my life, Jason couldn't take it from me. The golden child had fallen. And I never looked back.